So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the Express's accusations the EU is failing to honour agreements over British immigrants to the EU. So it's a load of rubbish because different EU member states have different rules around citizenship and residency. And the argument this gentleman makes no sense. So British nationals residing in a number of European countries have faced hardships and increased bureaucracy in the wake of Brexit. That was always going to happen because the end of freedom of movement. It was always going to happen. That, combined with the fact that a lot of people abuse the system where they would stay in Spain and they wouldn't register that they are staying in Spain. Therefore, when they worked, they would avoid paying taxes and other things. So, again, British people gamed the system, and once we left, if you didn't have the requirements for residency, I think it's if you stay over 6 months in Spain, amongst other things, I think you probably have to make certain amounts of money, etc., and you have to be able to support yourself. If you didn't fit the criteria, you weren't going to be given residency. It's not hard to figure out. So in Spain, Britons were not registered as legal residents prior to the end of the transition period, have been restricted to visits of no more than 90 days out of a given 180-day period. That's not just for Spain, that's for going to any EU country. If I wanted to go to Finland, for example, I could only stay there for no more than 90 days out of a given 180-day period. So it's not just for Spain, it's for other EU member states as well. Similar issues have affected Britons across the continent who have found their quality of life impacted by new post-Brexit rule changes. And again, these are the rules for third countries, and these are very generous rules, given that other third countries, if you want to travel to the EU, you have to have a visa. For example, my cousin, who doesn't have a British passport, for example, he had to apply for a visa when he wanted to go to Cyprus. Stuff like that, really. If I wanted to go to Cyprus, I would need a visa, but he did because of his passport requirements. So the EU are fairly generous with, the passport, the visa requirements, or sorry, the non-visa requirements, should we say? Senior research executive at Get Britain Out, Joshua Mackenzie, who we've spoken about before, he talks about the vindictive approach some EU countries have taken towards UK nationals, and this isn't about the EU then, it's about EU countries, European countries, EU member states. So again, it just don't make sense. He goes, people who are living abroad in other countries should follow the rules of where they are and should apply for citizenship if they need to. And the simple fact is they should have applied for residency if they were planning to stay for a long period of time in those countries. If you're going for a holiday, if you're going to stay there a month in a year, I think generally you'd be fine. You'd be able to fit in the 90 days out of a 180-day period. But if you're going to stay longer than that, that's where you have issues. Yes, but this goes beyond that. There is a basic principle set out in the withdrawal agreement about the rights of people to stay and continue as if as they had if they fill out the right paperwork. The problem is it's not about filling out the right paperwork. It's being accepted, fitting the criteria for residency. That's the key problem. I could fill out the paperwork to get a Lamborghini. I can't afford one. If I don't fit the criteria to get a residency in Spain, Finland, or Norway, any of these countries, right? I'm not going to get accepted. It's not about filling out the paperwork. It's about being eligible to be a resident. Do you understand? And a lot of these people have filled out the proper paperwork and sometimes found they've been rejected. Yeah, because they didn't fit the criteria, mate. It's because they didn't fit the criteria, evidently, because there are court proceedings. You can appeal your claims as well, depending on what the rules are in those countries. So if they filled out the paperwork and weren't given residency, it's not because the EU are being spiteful or Spain are being spiteful. It's because they didn't fit the criteria for residency. Come on, man. I don't get these people. Obviously, this one here, the Jeremy Hunt one, we'll talk about that one, about the technological solutions. We'll go through that whole thing again. But, the idea that if you fill out the right paperwork, you should be fine is a nonsense, honestly. He goes, they were rejected even though they have lived in Spain and the countries or France for more than 5 years. But if they've lived in them, did they apply for residency when they should have done? That's the key question. If they've stayed there for long periods of time, I think it's over 6 months, depending on the EU state, they're meant to register for residency. If they didn't register for residency, why didn't they? If they were working without declaring their income, that's tax evasion or avoidance. So again, it's just a big final flash for these people, that they're realising that there are consequences to your actions. He added, absolutely, in some EU countries, they are applying it very well, and there is a seamless transition. Yeah, probably because those people applying, if they're applying for it, and they have the criteria for residency, there should be no problem. It's clear that individual EU countries there is a much more vindictive approach. For example, you saw that when there was a trucker going across France that had his ham sandwich removed. Now, you could argue that's vindictive, but them's the rules. You can't take certain foods in to the EU. Try that for Australia as well. You can't take certain foods into Australia. Certain things have to face SPS checks. You could be bringing in something that's bacteria ridden, for example. I mean, a ham sandwich, you can argue, it's a bit of an egregious one. But again, welcome to the Brexit, sir. These are the rules. You respect the country you live in when it's some despotic nation. It is that sort of negative approach. Again, it's not a negative approach, though, is it? Are you going to argue the same for Australia? You guys talked about a points-based system. We could be like Australia and take control of our borders. Now the EU have taken control of their borders. Like, oh, that's mean. He goes, that vindictive approach is trickled down to member states, and its refusal to have some common sense. I mean, again, if you don't fit the criteria for residency, you can't complain. If you were staying in an EU country and you didn't register to that you're in that country, that's on you. That's on you. You can't complain at that point. He also lambasted the EU for not getting their house in order over residency rights prior to the end of the transition period. First of all, the UK didn't get their house in order. We had all sorts of problems dealing with people's applications. Secondly, you barely cite any examples for this. He goes, UK citizens should have any preferential treatment over third countries if they all have the same treaties. So if all things are equal, he's saying UK citizens should get better treatment. Doesn't make sense. He goes, you also need to have the same treatment and not have them treated as lesser and have those sorts of things implement on them. What he's saying here, it doesn't make any sense. If he's saying if all third countries have the same treaties, the UK citizens should have any preferential treatment. No, they shouldn't. Why should we? We're not special. We voted to leave the EU. Why should we get any special treatment? It should be based on criteria, not special treatment, honestly. They don't have a quota for how many residents they can accept, you idiot. He goes, this is what is happening now. At the moment, people are facing unnecessary barriers, increased costs, basically, because the EU didn't get their house in order and get it done in time. Again, it's not about the EU, though, is it? It's about individual member states, for a start. Secondly, these countries deal with residency applications all the time. They have everything set up that they would need. There isn't a problem here if you don't have your residency set up properly. That's on you. You should have sorted this out back when you first moved to the relevant EU country. But once Brexit happened, you should have realised, they could end freedom of movement. Something bad can happen here. With the withdrawal agreement, the residency rights of Brits living in Spain and other EU member states prior to the 1st of January 2021 are automatically protected. It's true, the residency rights. But what if you don't have the right to be a resident? That's the problem. The Foreign Office has been encouraging those British nationals who are covered under the agreement to register their residency if they haven't done so. If you haven't registered as a resident in that country and you're in breach of the visa-free rules, then I'd be very careful if I were you, because you can get done for that, and they could stop you from travelling to the EU, for example. But again, it's not my area. I don't care if people are made get their residency or not. But the simple fact is, him moaning at the EU for this doesn't make sense. It's up to individual nation states, and for the most part, we've not actually heard any issues where people are eligible for residency and were rejected. We've not heard any stories like this, have we? Otherwise, I'm sure this guy here, the Tim McNulty, or this big boy here, would have examples of it, but they don't. Because there aren't any. Not really. At least not as many as I'm aware. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And support the channel on Patreon if you can. But, just kind of simple fact is, if you didn't apply for residency, if you didn't apply for a resident in that country, don't complain. Honestly, don't complain. When you're trying to bend the rules, when you try and cheat the system, and in the end, you're the one getting punished for it, don't moan. Don't complain. It's all over. Don't cry, don't beg. Please, sir, gotta go.